The wine had barely left Robert Baratheon's mouth before he coughed hard, spitting blood into his beard. The maester rushed forward, but Robert waved him off with a shaky laugh. "It wasn't the wine," he grunted, voice strained. "Damn boar nicked me good, but not good enough." 3 weeks later, the king was walking again, slower than before, limping from a stitched-up thigh wound, but alive. Against all odds, Robert had lived, and Westeros would never be the same again. Back in the Red Keep, everything looked the same, but Robert could feel it in his bones. Something had changed. Cersei smiled too easily. Littlefinger walked too confidently. And Joffrey, well, the boy had grown too cold too fast. At first, Robert thought it was just his near death making him paranoid. But it wasn't. It was something darker. Joffrey had started acting like a man already. Not in the noble, brave way Robert had hoped, but in the spoiled, entitled, twisted way the Lannisters whispered their poison. Robert had barely settled back onto the Iron Throne before Joffrey stormed into the council chamber, demanding his place as prince and heir. "I should have been named protector of the realm when you fell," Joffrey snapped one day, fists clenched. "It's my right." Robert stared at him long and hard. "You're right," he repeated, slow and dangerous. "You think this throne is given because of rights? Boy, I took this damn thing with fire and steel. You've never raised a sword in your life." Joffrey didn't flinch. He simply turned and left. It unsettled Robert. The boy had no fear. Not of his father, not of the throne, not of blood. He acted like a lion, not a stag. 2 weeks later, Robert overheard a conversation in the gardens between Cersei and Jaime. He hadn't meant to, but when you live in a castle of whispers, secrets find you. And what he heard froze his blood. "He's yours, Jaime," Cersei whispered. "He always was." "Robert's too drunk to know the difference." Robert didn't move. His hand tightened around the stone pillar. The truth finally came crashing down. The golden hair, the arrogance, the coldness. It wasn't just upbringing. Joffrey wasn't his son. He turned and left before he heard more. His mind was already roaring like a battlefield. That night Robert didn't sleep. He sat in his solar, pouring wine he didn't drink, staring at a fire he didn't feel. Everything had been a lie. His legacy, his bloodline, his heir. He wanted to strangle Cersei with his bare hands. He wanted to kill Jaime where he stood. But more than that, Robert wanted to understand how he had missed it. How the mighty stag had been blind while the lions circled and fed on his house. The next morning, Robert summoned Eddard Stark. Ned arrived looking concerned. "You should be resting," he said, loyal as ever. "I need truth," Robert growled. "Not rest." So Robert asked the question he had once dismissed, foolishly, arrogantly, as nonsense. "Tell me, Ned, is he mine?" Ned didn't answer at first. His silence was answer enough. "Gods!" Robert whispered. He leaned back, like someone had driven a sword through his chest. "So it's true," Ned sighed. "I tried to tell you once." "You wouldn't listen?" Robert stared at the ceiling. "And I nearly died with a lie on my lips. What kind of king? What kind of man? Dies thinking he's leaving the realm to his bastard?" "You're alive now," Ned said gently. "You have time to fix this." Robert looked at him, eyes burning. "Then I will." And from that moment, the fire in Robert Baratheon returned, not the lazy heat of a drunk, but the searing wrath of the man who had once smashed the Targaryen line to ash. He would tear the lies down. He would drag the truth into the light. And if Joffrey wasn't his son, then by the gods, he would make sure the boy never sat that throne. But Robert had underestimated one thing, what Joffrey was becoming, and how far the Lannisters would go to keep the Game of Thrones in their hands. The small council chamber was silent when Robert entered, not with the sluggish sway of a drunk, but with the cold stride of a man ready for war. Varys blinked slowly. Littlefinger smiled like he always did, too wide to be honest, and Cersei narrowed her eyes, reading his every move. Robert didn't sit. He stood behind the iron chair, hand resting on the cold steel edge like a warning. "I've been king too long to ignore whispers," Robert began, his voice steady, quiet, the kind of quiet that made men nervous. "And I've been blind for too long to lies wrapped in gold." Cersei stiffened, but didn't speak. Robert's eyes met each council member's. From today, the boy Joffrey is no longer to be addressed as heir until his parentage is confirmed. Maester Pycelle will arrange the tests, quietly. The room froze. Littlefinger coughed awkwardly. Your Grace, that's a delicate subject. Varys, ever the shadow, nodded in polite agreement. Such news, if leaked, could shake the realm. Panic the nobles. Even incite war, Robert grunted. Then let it shake. I'd rather a kingdom on fire than one built on lies. Cersei stood slowly. Her voice was calm but cutting. You'd shame your own son before the court. Robert turned to her fully. Don't play that game with me. We both know what he is, and we both know what he's not. She stared back, her green eyes burning. You always hated him. I tried to love him, Robert growled. I wanted to. But he's not a Baratheon, and every time he opens his damn mouth, I hear the Lannisters whispering through his teeth. Cersei turned and walked out, not in defeat, but in defiance. Robert knew then she wouldn't go down quietly. That night, Joffrey stormed into Robert's chambers unannounced. You humiliate me in front of the realm. Robert didn't move from his chair. You should be grateful I didn't have you hanged the moment I knew you weren't mine. I am yours, Joffrey shouted. No, Robert said flatly. You're Jaime's. You think I don't see it now? The way you strut, like you own everything. The way you order people around like they're dogs. You're not a stag. You're a lion cub, raised to bite the hand that feeds you. Joffrey's jaw trembled with fury. When I'm king, you'll never be king, Robert snapped. Not while I draw breath. There it was. The line drawn, not between father and son, but between king and pretender. And in Joffrey's eyes, Robert saw it. Not fear, but hate. A deep, simmering hate that had no bottom. The next few days were tense. Cersei vanished from public view, gathering her house behind closed doors. Jaime returned to King's Landing under the excuse of family matters. Tywin sent a raven, but stayed in Casterly Rock, watching, waiting. Robert didn't sit idle. He summoned Stannis to court, his true brother, his rightful heir. It was time the crown returned to Baratheon blood. Time to rebuild what had been rotting under his nose for years. But Joffrey, twisted little thing that he was, played his own game. One morning, a servant burst into the throne room in tears. Robert rose from his chair, heart already thudding. What is it? It's Sir Barristan, she sobbed. He's dead. Stabbed in the alley behind the training yard. The room turned cold. Robert's fists clenched. Where was Joffrey this morning? No one answered. He stormed out of the hall, fury unchained, and headed for the boys' chambers. When he burst in, Joffrey was sitting at a table, calmly polishing his dagger. Robert stared at it. Did you think I'd cry? Joffrey asked without looking up. He was old, useless. You had him killed. I am the prince, Joffrey said. I will not be disrespected. Robert's rage boiled over. He grabbed Joffrey by the collar and slammed him against the wall so hard a painting fell off its hook. You think you can do as you please? You think you're untouchable? I'm untouchable, Joffrey hissed. And you're just a dying drunk who's too late to stop me. Robert didn't strike him, though every part of him wanted to. He dropped the boy and stepped back, breathing heavy, eyes wide. It wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was madness. He turned and walked out. That night, Robert called Ned again. I should have killed him, he muttered. You're still his king, Ned said. You don't need to kill him. You need to name Stannis. I will, Robert said quietly. But I've seen something in that boy. Something worse than I imagined. If I let him live, he'll bring this kingdom to its knees, and if you kill him, Ned asked. Robert looked at the fire. Then I burn with him. The moon hung heavy over King's Landing, casting pale light over the Red Keep, like the eyes of old gods, watching in silence. Inside the walls, the tension thickened with each passing hour. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Lords stayed away from court. And behind every door, every corner, someone listened. Robert had become a ghost of his old self. Not drunk, not broken, but dangerous. Sober, furious, and aware. A lion had worn his crown for years without him seeing it. Now he would tear the beast apart, piece by piece. He sat with Stannis in the royal chambers, candles flickering between them. I should have named you my heir long ago, Robert muttered, rubbing his temples. Stannis said nothing at first. His face was carved from stone, cold and still. I told you once. I told you what Cersei was. You ignored it." Robert gave a humorless laugh. "You're not wrong. I was too drunk to see, too proud to listen. But I see it now. And I need you." Stannis nodded stiffly. "You'll need more than me. The Lannisters won't let go of the throne quietly. I don't care how much gold they have or what dogs they call banners. Joffrey's no king, and I'll drag his true father out in chains if I must." But Stannis, ever the realist, leaned forward. "Then strike now. Don't wait. Arrest Jaime, lock Cersei in a tower, announce the truth before they move first." Robert hesitated. "I have to think of the realm." Stannis slammed his fist against the table. "You've thought too little of the realm for years, brother. That boy killed Sir Barristan. Who do you think he'll kill next?" Robert's jaw tightened. He knew Stannis was right, but pulling the trigger on his own family, the queen, the prince, the whole twisted web, meant opening the gates to war. And yet, maybe war was already here. Meanwhile, Joffrey watched from the shadows. He wasn't stupid. He knew his days as heir were numbered. Every look his father gave him was colder now, every word sharper. The council was shifting. Men who once bent to him now avoided his gaze. He didn't understand loyalty. He understood fear. So he decided to remind them. The next morning, the head of Lord Bywater, the city watch commander loyal to Robert, was delivered to the throne room in a burlap sack. No trial, no explanation. Robert stood over the bloody cloth, his face unreadable. "Who did this?" he asked the room. Silence. Varys, ever delicate, whispered, "It would seem the city watch is undergoing a change in leadership." Robert looked at him. "You mean they've been bought?" Varys only bowed his head slightly. Robert stepped forward and drew his warhammer, the one he hadn't touched in years. He held it in his massive hands, like it had never left him. "Then we take it back." That night, Cersei came to his chambers, dressed in black and gold. She shut the door behind her, eyes cold and hard. "You've turned this castle into a war camp." Robert didn't look at her. "You turned it into a brothel of lies. You're playing a dangerous game, Robert." He stood, towering over her. "No, you are. You made a fool of me, lied to the crown, tainted my legacy with a bastard that wears my name." Cersei smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "And you think the truth will fix that? That people will love you for admitting your heir is illegitimate? That they'll forgive you for leaving the realm in the hands of monsters while you drank yourself to death?" He stared at her, breathing slowly. "No," he said. "I don't expect their love, but they'll remember me as the man who burned the lie down." Cersei stepped closer, her voice lowering. "Then be ready, because when you make war on a lion, you better not miss." She left as quickly as she came, and Robert sat alone again. At dawn, Ned Stark arrived at the gates of the Red Keep with 24 Northmen, not as an army, but as a shield. Robert welcomed him personally. "It's begun," Robert said grimly. Ned nodded. "And it won't end until one of you lies dead." Robert looked out at the city. Smoke rose from chimneys. Merchants shouted in the streets. Children played in the dirt, all unaware of the storm coming. "Then let it end with me," he whispered, "not with that boy on the throne." Because somewhere deep inside, Robert knew the truth. If Joffrey ruled, the realm wouldn't survive him. Not 10 years, maybe not even 5. The boy was a wildfire, and it was only a matter of time before he set the whole world ablaze. By midweek, the Red Keep was no longer a castle. It was a powder keg. Guards shifted loyalties. Ravens flew at dawn and dusk. The corridors hummed with fear. Every footstep echoed like a threat. Everyone knew something was coming. No one knew when the spark would ignite. Robert Baratheon stood in the great hall, where he had once held feasts and flung whole chickens over his shoulder with laughter. Now that laughter was gone, buried under layers of silence, secrets, and sharpened steel. Beside him stood Eddard Stark, grim-faced, his sword at his hip, and behind them Stannis, unreadable as stone. "Send for Jaime," Robert said. Ned frowned. "You sure?" Robert nodded. "This doesn't end until I look that golden bastard in the eyes and remind him why I took this crown in the first place." The Kingsguard were reluctant to summon their own commander, but Robert's word still held enough weight, barely. An hour later, Jaime Lannister swaggered into the hall in full armor, sword resting comfortably at his side, confidence dripping from every step. "You called for me, Your Grace?" he asked, with that mocking half-smile that had always irked Robert. Robert didn't rise from his seat on the throne. "You've been quiet lately, Kingslayer." "I've been watching," Jaime said coolly. "Seems like the game's changing again. That's always fun." "You've played it too long," Robert said, voice low and steady. "Too long and too well." Jaime tilted his head. "Careful. Sounds like an accusation." "It is," Robert growled. "Joffrey isn't mine. He's yours. And you knew I never would have sat back if I knew." Jaime didn't blink. "What does it matter now? He's the heir. Everyone sees him as your son. The realm needs stability." Robert stood. "The realm needs truth. And you're the blade that cut honor out of my house." Jaime smiled faintly. "Says the man who drank through a decade while lions built his kingdom." Stannis stepped forward, his voice cold. "You admit it, then?" Jaime's smile faded. He looked at Robert, then Ned, then back. "Admit? Why not? I've slept with the Queen. We made children. Everyone's known it. They just chose not to say it. Because power, not truth, runs this world." And there it was. Robert's fingers tightened around the pommel of his warhammer. For a moment, it looked like he might swing it then and there, crushing Jaime's skull before the guards could react. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded at Ned. "Take him. Put him in the black cells. We'll deal with him later." Jaime looked surprised, just for a flicker. Then 6 of Ned's men closed in. He didn't resist. As he was led away, he called back to Robert, "You can lock me away, old man, but you'll never break the lions. We bite, remember?" Robert didn't answer. The arrest sent shockwaves through the court. The next day, Cersei was confined to her chambers, guarded by 2 of Stannis's personal men. She screamed about treason, about injustice, about her children. Robert listened to none of it. The more she screamed, the more he understood what kind of poison she had spilled over the realm while he was drowning in wine. Meanwhile, Joffrey disappeared. The boy had vanished from his quarters before dawn, leaving behind only a servant who swore he had gone for a walk. But Robert wasn't a fool. Joffrey was in hiding. Somewhere in the castle. Somewhere plotting. "Search the keep," Robert commanded. "From the dungeons to the towers. I want him found." But they searched all day. No sign of the boy. That evening, Maester Pycelle finally arrived, trembling with age and fear. "Your Grace, there's something you should see." He handed Robert a raven's message. The seal was broken. The parchment smelled of smoke. "King Joffrey has left the Red Keep. He rides to Casterly Rock under protection of Lannister men. House Lannister recognizes no heir but the true-born son of Queen Cersei. The war you wanted, Your Grace. It has begun." Robert stared at the letter for a long time. The flames beside his chair crackled and spat. He looked over to Ned, then to Stannis. "So the boy ran," he said bitterly. "Let him run. Let him hide behind his grandfather's walls." Ned frowned. "He'll gather support. There are still lords who owe their gold and lives to Tywin." Robert's voice grew quiet. "Then we tear that gold from their dead hands." By midnight, Robert had summoned every raven in the tower. Declarations were written, signed, sealed. Joffrey Baratheon was declared a false prince. Jaime Lannister, a traitor and usurper of royal blood. Cersei Lannister, stripped of all titles. In their place, Robert named his true heir, Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone. The letters would go out by morning, to the Vale, to the Reach, to the Riverlands and beyond. But war had already begun. And somewhere on the King's Road, Joffrey Lannister, no longer called Baratheon, was laughing in the saddle, heading toward his grandfather's fortress, dreaming of revenge and fire. The letters flew from the Red Keep like black wings of judgment, spreading across Westeros with inked truth and royal fury. Lords who once bent the knee in drunken loyalty now read with trembling hands the words they had long whispered, but never dared speak aloud. Joffrey Baratheon was a lie. A Lannister bastard wearing a Baratheon crown. Some tore the messages and tossed them into their hearths. Others locked their gates and stayed quiet, waiting to see who would win. But a few, a brave few, sent ravens back with a single word: for the stag. In Dragonstone, House Baratheon's ancestral seat, the banners of black and gold were raised again. Stannis stood on the cliffs, wind whipping his cloak, watching the tide roll in. For the first time in years, he was not just the forgotten brother, he was heir, and he was ready. Meanwhile, in Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister read Robert's proclamation with cold calculation. The candlelight flickered as he sat behind his desk, his jaw tight, fingers steepled. "He moves faster than expected," he said without looking up. Joffrey sat across from him, lips curled in a smirk. "Let him. He's old. He'll die before he reaches us." Tywin glanced at him then. "You're not to speak unless I say so." Joffrey's smirk faltered. He looked down. Tywin returned to the letter. "Robert has named Stannis as heir. He'll raise the Stormlands, maybe even the Vale, if Jon Arryn's boy listens to his bannermen. The Riverlands will waver. The North belongs to Eddard Stark." Joffrey clenched his fists. "Then we kill them all." Tywin's eyes narrowed. "This is not a tavern brawl, boy. This is a war of thrones. You win it by patience, not tantrums. But he's taken my birthright." "You have no birthright!" Tywin roared suddenly, his voice booming through the chamber. "You are not a Baratheon. You are what we made you, and I will not lose this war because you don't understand how to be quiet." Joffrey stood abruptly, shaking, then stormed out. But he didn't leave in shame. He left in hate. Back in King's Landing, Robert gathered his most loyal lords and knights in the throne room. His armor, once dusty from disuse, now gleamed like it did during the rebellion. The warhammer rested at his side again, its weight familiar, almost comforting. Ned stood beside him, freshly arrived from the north, with word from Winterfell. The bannermen of the north would stand with Robert, not just for loyalty, but for truth. Stannis flanked Robert's other side, eyes like iron, voice like cold stone. "We strike fast. If we move before Tywin consolidates, we can take the Riverlands and cut off his southern route." Robert nodded. "Then we march." But just as the council began finalizing the war plans, a messenger burst in, breathless, clutching another raven scroll. Robert took it himself. His eyes scanned it quickly, then slowed. Ned stepped closer. "What is it?" Robert swallowed hard. "Joffrey's not hiding anymore. He's crowned himself." A hush fell over the room. "He did what?" Stannis asked, voice sharp. "He crowned himself king in Casterly Rock." The Lannister bannerman bent the knee. "He's calling himself Joffrey the First, and worse, Tywin sent golden riders to Highgarden. The Reach might back him." Ned frowned. "If the Reach joins the Lannisters, we'll be flanked. The South is too fertile, too rich. We won't outlast a siege." Robert let out a long breath. "Then we don't let it come to that." He turned to his men. "We take the fight to them. We break the Golden Lion before his claws reach the Crownlands. I will ride at the front, not from the back of a cart, not drunk and bloated, but as the king I was meant to be." "And the boy?" someone asked from the council table. Robert's gaze darkened. "He wanted to wear my crown," he said slowly. "Now he'll choke on it." By week's end, King's Landing buzzed with war. The smiths worked day and night, reforging old blades. Ravens came and went with the sound of thunder. Ships gathered in Blackwater Bay under Baratheon banners, ready to carry troops south. Robert stood on the battlements one final time before leaving the city. He looked down at the streets, the people, the life he had so carelessly wasted. He had been king for 15 years, but only now, as the realm bled from old wounds, did he understand what it truly meant to carry a crown. "You ever think it had come to this?" Ned asked, standing beside him. Robert shook his head. "No, I thought the war ended with Rhaegar. I didn't see I was building a new one in my own house." He turned to Ned. "If I fall, promise me this. Don't let that boy rule. He's not just a false king. He's a monster. He'll burn this world down just to hear himself scream over the ashes." "I promise," Ned said. Robert nodded. "Then let's ride. One last war." The horns blew from the gates of the city, and the king, the true king, rode out with fire in his chest and a warhammer in his hand, heading for the storm that carried his name. The sky burned with smoke and fire as the battle of the Trident's echo returned. But this time, it wasn't Targaryen banners across the field. It was gold. Endless gold. The lion had risen again, teeth sharper, claws bloodier. Robert Baratheon stood at the front of his army, soaked in sweat and fury. His war hammer, the same one that had caved in Prince Rhaegar's chest, was now slick with fresh blood. But this time Robert didn't feel triumph. He felt the weight of every swing, every man who fell, every scream that echoed off the hills. Across the battlefield, the Lannister forces pushed harder, thousands strong, well-fed, well-paid, and at their center, high on a ridge under a golden tent, Joffrey Lannister, self-proclaimed king, sat atop a white horse, watching with amusement as men died in his name. Robert had dreamed of the moment he'd face the boy again, not as father and son, but as king and pretender. And now the gods had given it to him. War again, for a crown, for the truth, and for vengeance. "Hold the right flank," Robert roared, galloping through the line. "Stannis, take the hill before nightfall, and tell Sir Garland to drive their cavalry into the river, drown them in their own pride." He paused just long enough to look toward the ridge. Joffrey was still there, surrounded by red-cloaked guards, laughing as his archers fired volleys into the sky. Robert gritted his teeth. "I'm coming for you, boy." Meanwhile, Eddard Stark was fighting his own war, not with sword, but with honor. He led the vanguard through the middle, cutting through Lannister troops who fought with desperation, but not loyalty. These were not men who believed in a cause. They believed in coin. And coin, Ned knew, runs dry faster than blood. Still, they fought hard. The Lannister army had something worse than loyalty: fear. Fear of Tywin, fear of Joffrey, and fear of losing the power they'd built on lies. As night fell, Robert's forces finally took the hill. Fires burned across the fields. The stench of death mixed with mud and ash. But the war wasn't over. Not until Robert stood face to face with the boy who wore his name. The next morning, Robert ordered a direct charge on the ridge. "Break their center," he told his men. "I don't care if you burn the ground beneath them. I want that tent. I want the false king dragged screaming before me." And so they did. The battle turned from strategy to slaughter. Lannister knights fell under northern axes. Stormlander spears split their shields open like fruit. And Robert, huge, thunderous Robert, smashed through the Golden Guard like he was born for it. Finally, he stood just yards from the command tent. Joffrey stepped out, flanked by 2 guards, his golden crown tilted slightly. His face had changed since King's Landing, sharper, crueler, still young, but with a madness in his eyes that no boy should ever have. "Come to die, old man?" Joffrey sneered. Robert stepped forward, armor cracked, breathing heavy. "You were never a boy," he growled. "You were a curse in a cradle," Joffrey laughed. "You're not even a king anymore. You're a relic." A drunk swinging a hammer at ghosts. Robert dropped his warhammer on the ground with a thud. He stepped closer. "No more war, Joffrey. No more armies. Just us." The boy blinked. "You want to fight me? With your hands?" Robert's eyes darkened. "You called yourself a king. Time to prove it." What followed wasn't a duel. It was a reckoning. Joffrey swung first, a dagger in his hand, sloppy and furious. Robert caught his wrist mid-air and slammed his fist into the boy's jaw. The sound was sickening. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed across Robert's chest. Joffrey screamed, stumbled back, then charged again. But he wasn't fast enough, not skilled enough, and Robert grabbed him by the collar and threw him into the dirt. "You wore my crown," Robert spat, kicking the blade away. "You spat on my name. You murdered good men. And you thought I wouldn't come?" Joffrey crawled backwards, blood pouring from his nose, his lip torn. "You're not my father." Robert knelt down, his shadow towering over the broken boy. "No," he said softly. "But that's the one thing you ever got right." He raised his fist once more, but then he stopped. He looked down at the beaten, trembling child in the mud, and saw not a king, not a monster, but the hollow thing left behind by lies and incest and unchecked power. Killing him here would be mercy, and Robert Baratheon had never been merciful. He stood, turned to his guards. "Chain him. Let the realm see what a false king looks like, and let him rot, crown and all." The soldiers obeyed. Joffrey screamed, spat, cursed every name he knew, but it didn't matter. The war was over. The boy had been beaten, and truth, after years buried beneath wine and gold, had risen. That night Robert stood outside his tent, alone. The wind whistled. The fires burned low. Ned approached slowly. "You did it." Robert shook his head. I saved the throne. The realm's still bleeding, and I don't know if we have enough men left to stitch it back together. He sighed. But maybe now. They'll remember the cost of lies. The war was over, but peace felt like a stranger. The banners had been lowered, the swords sheathed, and the corpses buried or burned. Yet the smell of blood still lingered in the air, like a reminder that Westeros would never be what it once was. Robert Baratheon returned to King's Landing not as a victor basking in glory, but as a man aged by guilt, silence, and too many graves. The people cheered when he entered the gates, throwing flowers at his feet and chanting his name like he was still their roaring king. But Robert barely looked at them. His eyes were set on the Red Keep, the place where it had all begun, where a lie had lived like a parasite under his roof for 15 years. When he passed the throne room, he didn't enter. He didn't even glance at the Iron Throne. Let the realm worship its cold spikes and ugly history. Robert had bled too much for it, lost too much. He no longer wanted to sit on the damned thing. He only wanted to make sure the right man did. That night, he met with Ned, Stannis, and a few trusted bannermen in the Tower of the Hand. I'm abdicating, Robert said bluntly. Pouring no wine, offering no warm-up. The room went still. Stannis blinked. You're what? I'm stepping down. I've worn this crown too long. Let it weigh on someone else's head now. Someone who wasn't blind to betrayal in his own bed. Ned leaned forward, frowning. You have the people's love, Robert. And the realm needs stability. Robert chuckled bitterly. The people's love fed me while I drank and whored through a kingdom of rot. And what did they get in return? Joffrey. He looked to Stannis, serious now. You're the heir. You always were. It's your turn. Stannis didn't smile. He rarely did. But there was a flicker in his eyes. Purpose, maybe pride, maybe dread. He gave a single stiff nod. Then I will rule, and you'll rule well, Robert said. Cold, dull, and joyless, but fair. That's what the realm needs now. They chuckled softly. But it faded fast. 3 days later, Robert made it official. In the great hall, beneath the eyes of lords and ladies and all the frightened survivors of war, Robert removed his crown. Not ceremoniously. There was no song, no flourish. Just a man placing the weight he no longer wanted onto a velvet cloth and stepping back. Westeros doesn't need a drunk swinging a hammer, he said. It needs a man who sees through lies. Then he nodded to Stannis, and for the first time in his life, Robert Baratheon turned his back on the Iron Throne. Willingly, Joffrey never left the Black Cells. Stannis refused to execute him immediately, not out of mercy, but calculation. Let the world see him rot, he said. Let them remember what happens when a bastard wears a crown. Robert never visited him again. He didn't need to. He already knew what kind of man the boy had become. And knowing that was punishment enough, Cersei was gone. Rumor had it she took poison on the ride back from Casterly Rock, choosing death over living in a world where her golden lies no longer ruled. Others said she fled across the narrow sea. Robert hoped she was dead. He wouldn't lose sleep either way. The days turned quiet after that. No more horns, no more war councils. Robert retired to Storm's End, where the sea winds bit through his old bones and the cliffs reminded him of younger days. Days when he swung a hammer for love, not legacy. Ned visited once more before returning to Winterfell. Funny, Robert said, watching the waves crash below. I fought 2 wars to win a throne I didn't want, and when I finally gave it up, I slept through the whole night. You did what many couldn't, Ned said. You saw the truth, faced it. That's more than most kings ever do. Robert chuckled softly. Don't make me a martyr, Ned. I was a blind fool with too much strength and not enough wisdom. He paused. But I did one thing right. I stopped that boy before the world burned for him. Years later, the story would be told in every corner of the realm, the king who lived long enough to see the monster he raised, the warrior who stepped down rather than rule with lies, the drunken brute who finally stood sober before the truth. Some called Robert Baratheon a tragic king. Others called him the last real warrior Westeros ever knew. But only a few, those who knew him truly, would say it plainly. He was the man who saved the realm from his own son, and in the end that was enough.